Who was Cú Chulainn in Celtic Mythology Part 1? The tale of Ireland's possibly most famous hero began in pre-Christian times. His deeds, courage, and tragedy of his life would echo throughout the ages and become symbolic to Irish heritage. His birth was one of mystery. His mother was Deichtine, the sister of King Concobar of Ulster, and one day she went missing from the capital. Later, King Concobar and some nobles were in the countryside hunting magical birds when they were beset by a fierce snowstorm and were forced to take shelter. They found a house and were greeted by none other than the legendary god Lugh of the Tuatha Dé Danann, who had taken as his wife Concobar's sister Deichtine. She was also pregnant with the god's son, and she gave birth to a boy that night, and he was named Setanta. It was decided that Concobar and the other nobles would foster and raise the boy. During his youth, the boy was strong and adventurous, and one day he went onto a playing field without asking for protection from the other boys, which is customary. Insulted and feeling challenged, the other boys attacked Setanta, trying to beat and subdue him. Little did these boys know this boy was the son of a legendary god, and he had his own powers. During this fight, Setanta was gripped by a furious rage, and his body transformed, mutated, deformed grotesquely, and grew strong. He shook from head to toe, and he became monstrous, hideous, shapeless, unheard of. His body made a furious twist inside his skin, and his knees and shins switched to the rear. One eye sucked into his head, and the other bulged out. He had become gripped by the Riastrad, the warp spasm, and he was now a berserking monster, and his fury was terrifying. He fought the boys off viciously until his foster father, King Concobar, stopped the melee. Setanta's legend continued sometime later as he visited Chulainn the smith during a feast. Concobar had brought Setanta with him, but had forgot Setanta was also coming along later. And when asked by Chulainn if any would be coming late, he responded no. When Setanta arrived at the feast, Chulainn loosed his hound to kill the boy, believing he was an intruder. The hound was enormous and vicious, but Setanta killed the hound by smashing it against a standing stone. Chulainn was devastated by the loss of his dog, and Setanta, realizing the mistake, offered to rear a new hound for Chulainn. But until the hound was ready, he took its place, and thus Cú Chulainn became his name, Chulainn's Hound. Cú Chulainn was destined for a short life. According to a prophecy from the druid Cathbad, anyone who took up arms on a certain day would have everlasting fame and a short life. Cú Chulainn heard this, but not the part about a short life, and he took up arms that day. Later, Cú Chulainn entered the Riastrad and killed 3 men who had boasted about killing more men than all others in Ulster. He had to be calmed by 3 bare-breasted women to embarrass him and dunked in water to cool him down. His strength and prowess were growing. His legend began in Celtic mythology. Who was Cú Chulainn in Celtic Mythology Part 2? As the son of Lugh grew older, he became more handsome. It was read by the men in Ulster that he would steal their wives and daughters, but his eyes were only for one, a woman named Emer. But her father, Forgol monarch, opposed this, and he suggested that Cú Chulainn train with the legendary warrior woman, Scathach, hoping Cú Chulainn would be slain during this training, as it was rumored to be very deadly. Cú Chulainn traveled to the island of Skye in Scotland to a castle called Dunscaith, where Scathach resided. There he met and began training, and was trained in many of the arts of war, and became ever more deadly and fearsome. He was also given the magical spear, Gáe Bulg, which was said to kill with one blow. While there, he also trained with Ferdiad, another warrior who became his best friend, and they shared great admiration for each other. One day, Scathach's rival Aoife came to the castle and challenged Scathach to a battle to the death. Scathach had tried to give Cú Chulainn a potion to keep him asleep so he would not get involved in battle. But the son of the god was too strong, and he woke after an hour and joined the battle. He fought Aif, but they were evenly matched, and the battle raged until Cú Chulainn distracted Aif by saying Scathach's horse and chariot had fallen off a cliff, and he seized her and held a sword to her throat. He said he would let her go if she bore him a son and stopped her hate of Scathach. She agreed. He left her pregnant with child, but with instructions that the boy come find him when he's old enough, at about 7 years old. And he cannot state his name to a single band, and he does not back down from a challenge. Their son's name was Conlaw. Cú Chulainn returned to Ulster and wished to marry Myr, but Fugall refused. Enraged, Cú Chulainn stormed his fortress and engaged in battle with his men, and killed 24 men with sheer battle prowess, stole Fugall's treasures, and carried off his love, Myr. Fugall was devastated by all this, and fell from the ramparts of his own castle to his death. Myr, now respecting Cú Chulainn, agreed to marriage. His legend continued in Celtic mythology. Who is Cú Chulainn in Celtic mythology Part 3? 7 years after Cú Chulainn left Scotland, his son, Conla, was ready to meet him. He had spent years with his mother, training under Aif, all the ways of a warrior in battle. He was strong like his father before him, formidable and highly skilled, deadly even at his young age. As promised, Aif sent young Conla to Ireland just as Cú Chulainn instructed, with 3 Gias, which are like prohibitions or promises that must not be broken. The first Gias was he must not turn back on his journey. His second was he must never refuse a challenge, and his third was he must never tell a single man his name. He journeyed alone by boat across the sea from Scotland to Ireland. No easy feat, but even at 7 the boy was gifted, and he reached the shores, and he started practicing his martial prowess, displaying his skills for all to see. He soon drew the attention of the men of Ulster, and Concobar sent a man named Condir to talk to him. Condir asked Conla his name, but Conla refused, and only asked if they would like to fight him in single combat or as a group, and that Condir was not worth fighting. Condir was insulted and returned to Concobar, who sends another man out to meet Conla, who uses a sling to bring that man down easily. Concobar sends more men, and each is defeated in single combat by Conla, who humiliates each one in turn with his great skill and prowess. Cú Chulainn heard the exploits of this Myr boy and went out to meet him himself. Myr, his wife, warned him that the boy was Conla, son of Aif, but Cú Chulainn foolishly rebuked her and went out to meet the boy anyway because the honor of Ulster was at stake. Cú Chulainn met Conla on the beach and asked him his name. Conla again refused to give it to a single man, and Cú Chulainn challenged him for his impudence. The two battled a great battle, matching each other in skill and prowess. Cú Chulainn was surprised by the boy. The top of his hair was cut by the boy's sword, and he was held under the water twice by the boy. Enraged and furious, Cú Chulainn resorted to using the spear Gáe Bulg, and the spear dealt a fatal blow to his son. Sadly, Cú Chulainn carried the boy up the shore to the Ulstermen and identified him to them as his son. The boy greeted all of them in turn and then said farewell to his father before he died. Cú Chulainn grieved his son for 3 days straight as all of Ulster mourned in Celtic mythology. Who was Cú Chulainn in Celtic mythology Part 4? In ancient times, wealth was measured in different ways than today, and one way was by owning herds and bulls. It is for this reason that a particularly fierce conflict was fought. The Tombo Kulnya, also known as the Cattle Raid of Cooley, there was a particularly fertile stud who was once a man, named Don Kulnya, and Queen Medb of Connacht and King Alil wanted to possess it so that their riches were equal. The problem was, this bull was owned by an Ulster man, and he did not want to give it up to her. So, Medb and Alil resolved to steal the bull from Ulster, and they raised an army to do so. Now, the men of Ulster were suffering from a curse at that time, beset upon them by the goddess Macha, after they had offended and slighted her, and none were in any shape to fight another army, all except Cú Chulainn. When the armies of Connacht marched upon Ulster lands, the bull was warned by the Morrigan in crow form of the coming army, and it prepared. He then gored the first herdsman that tried to capture him, and trampled about 50 others before escaping off into the countryside. Cú Chulainn was determined to defend Ulster and stopped the Connacht army from advancing further, and he met them at a ford at Slifoy and invoked the right of single combat. Queen Medb and King Alil began sending warriors against Cú Chulainn, and he began one of the most epic and dramatic standoffs in human history. One after another, after another, after another, hundreds of warriors were defeated by Cú Chulainn. The ground ran red with blood and gore. Cú Chulainn was sometimes wounded, and he was healed and tended to by his trusted charioteer, Lugh, who stuck by his side as Cú Chulainn defeats champions every day for months, effectively halting Queen Medb's advance. But then it got more difficult for Cú Chulainn. One day, he was approached by a beautiful woman who offered her love to him. Cú Chulainn refused this advance and offended her. This woman was none other than the Morg, and he had angered a war goddess. Meanwhile, Queen Medb was trying to get a formidable warrior named Lugh MacMophemus, who had also trained under the legendary warrior Scathach, to challenge Cú Chulainn, but he refused because he thought Cú Chulainn was too much of a youth, because Cú Chulainn could not grow a beard. So Medb sent women to Cú Chulainn, who urged him to make a false beard so he could fight the most skilled warriors of Connacht. And of course, Cú Chulainn, who was a man driven by honor and challenge, made a false beard out of heath grass and berry juice, and created a quite convincing beard for his face so that Lugh would fight him. The ploy worked, and Lugh decided he would fight Cú Chulainn. And a battle they did have. Lugh was skilled and formidable and strong, and just as able a warrior as Cú Chulainn. Many wounds did Cú Chulainn sustain during this battle. And it was during this battle that the Morrigan decided to try to get her revenge. First, she came at Cú Chulainn as a great black eel, and Cú Chulainn was held and wrapped up in her form, and unable to defend himself for a moment. Lugh drove his spear into Cú Chulainn and ripped open his belly and mangled his entrails, giving Cú Chulainn a grievous wound. Cú Chulainn's pain was great, and the waters ran red with his blood. But someone watching the battle insulted him and taunted him as he lay in pain and dying. At this, Cú Chulainn grew wrathful and broke one of his legs free of the eel and smashed it underneath his foot, breaking its ribs. At this, the eel released him and retreated. His battle continued against Lugh, and Cú Chulainn, holding his entrails, was able to match Lugh and hold him off from inflicting further damage. As their battle continued, the cattle were stirred and began rampaging through the countryside, and trampled 100 men to death. It was during this time that the Morgan returned in the form of a great black wolf, and Cuchulainn was knocked down by the wolf, and it ripped and tore at him, pulling at his flesh, trying to devour him. But Cuchulainn managed to grab the wolf by the neck, and he shoved his fingers in its right eye socket and crushed the orb within, again sending the Morgan as the wolf into retreat. Again, Lugh came at him, and their battle continued again shortly before the Morgan again tried to defeat him. This time, she came at him as a great red heifer, and as he saw her stampeding towards him, he jumped out of the way and cast a stone at her rear leg, shattering it, and this time she retreated without coming at him again. As Cuchulainn was rising to his feet after this, he was cleaved at the groin by Lugh, and was caused great pain. Cuchulainn's anger rose so mighty that he brought the spear Gáe Bulg into the stomach of Lugh, and dealt a fatal blow to the man. Cuchulainn let the man fall forward into the water as he died, so that all knew he did not flee as he died a warrior. Cuchulainn had vanquished a great foe, but he was greatly wounded, with his guts hanging out, his groin cleaved, and many other wounds besides. Lugh brought him back to his camp and began mending him. Later, he was visited by his father, the god Lugh, who told him he was his son, and mended Cuchulainn's wounds so that he could continue his battle as he single-handedly defended Ulster in Celtic mythology. Who was Cuchulainn in Celtic mythology? Part 5. The Cattle Raid of Cooley continued for months, with Cuchulainn remaining undefeated during his standoff at the ford. The conflict had spread to other locations, however, and the youth corps of soldiers Cuchulainn had fought as a child, known as the Emain Macha, had attacked the Connacht army and were all slaughtered to a person during the battle. When Cuchulainn heard about this, his rage boiled over uncontrollably, and he fully gave in to the inner frenzy of the Riastrad, transforming and mutating into the most powerful version of the monster ever witnessed. His murderous vengeance was without bounds. He attacked the armies of Connacht and viciously slaughtered hundreds of soldiers, dismembering and beheading his foes, ripping and chopping them apart in a frenetic rage. His fury was so complete, he started stacking the bodies, using the bodies to build a tall wall, the stinking carcasses noticeable for miles and unheard of in these ancient times. And the horror of Cuchulainn's vengeance was unprecedented, as the Connacht army recoiled in terror at his barbarity. Eventually, he returned to his normal form, and Queen Medb sent one of Cuchulainn's foster fathers to fight Cuchulainn. Cuchulainn did not want to fight him, so he agreed to yield to Fergus so long as he returned the favor the next time they met, and both warriors lived. Queen Medb hatched a new plan to destroy her foe. She set her daughter, Findabair, to seduce Cuchulainn's peer and best friend, Ferdiad. Findabair, using alcohol, bribery, and sensuality, successfully turned Ferdiad against his best friend, and he agreed to meet Cuchulainn on the field and slay him. Ferdiad was the equal of Cuchulainn, having been trained at the same time by Scathach, and the battle they engaged in was an emotional one, lasting for 3 days. Ferdiad had impenetrable skin, so Cuchulainn could not seem to ever harm his friend, and Ferdiad started to gain the upper hand, wearing Cuchulainn down, and it was at this time that Cuchulainn feared for his life and called for his charioteer, Lugh, to float the spear Gáe Bulg down the river to him. Cuchulainn first took a regular spear and threw it at Ferdiad, who blocked it, and then he used his foot to throw Gáe Bulg, which entered through the rectum of Ferdiad, and its magic spread the barbs throughout the insides of Ferdiad, killing him. Cú Chulainn mourned the loss of his best friend and carried him off the battlefield in solemn grief. The battle continued, but then the effects of Macha's curse upon the Ulstermen finally wore off, and they were able to join the battle. Hundreds of soldiers joined the fray and battled the armies of Connaught, pushing them back. Cú Chulainn at that point pulled back from the conflict, tending to his wounds and resting. During one point, Cú Chulainn saw one of his foster fathers, Fergus, bring a Connaught army into the conflict. He goes out to meet him. When the two met, Fergus remembered their agreement and he yielded to Cú Chulainn, pulling his army off the field. Connaught's army started to panic. Cú Chulainn then pursued Queen Medb and broke through her soldiers to get to her when she was vulnerable during her menstruation, and he then had her at his mercy. It was at this point Cú Chulainn could have ended Queen Medb's life and exacted vengeance upon her. But she begged for her life, and Cú Chulainn saw no honor in killing her then. He spared her and guarded her retreat, showing the world the kind of man he was. He lived by honor. He single-handedly defended the kingdom of Ulster with honor. The blood of a god ran through him as he achieved everlasting fame. His legend continued in Celtic mythology. Who was Cú Chulainn in Celtic mythology Part 6? Cú Chulainn lived on for several more years, having more adventures. His enemies became numerous, and many of the children of men he had slain wanted revenge. None, however, were more bitter than the queen whose plan he had thwarted, Queen Medb. Despite him sparing her and ensuring she lived, she harbored growing hate and resentment towards the hero. Her brooding and bitterness continued for years, and she plotted ways to exact revenge upon him. She conspired with others who had lost their loved ones to Cú Chulainn's wrath. One, a man named Lugh Conroy, whose father had been slain by Cú Chulainn years earlier, was consumed with the obsession of killing Cú Chulainn. And another named Eric Mac Cairprey was the son of a king slain by Cú Chulainn. There were others that also joined Queen Medb's plan to slay Cú Chulainn, and together they created a conspiracy and plot to draw him out and kill him. Cú Chulainn had a particular geas, an aversion to eating dog meat. As his namesake was Chulainn's Hound, he forbade himself from eating it. Breaking a geas was something that could greatly weaken the hero. To draw him out, Queen Medb had 6 sorcerers and sorceresses, called the Sons and Daughters of Callatan, who were all siblings and their father had been slain by Cú Chulainn. Used their magic near where Cú Chulainn dwelled to create the sounds of battle, war, crying of the dying, and more, in an attempt to draw Cú Chulainn closer to the location. King Conchobar had received word of this plot, and he attempted to stop Cú Chulainn from noticing it by having a great feast and party for Cú Chulainn, and it worked for several days as Cú Chulainn was too preoccupied to notice all the noise. But Conchobar knew he could not keep it up forever and decided to move Cú Chulainn to the Valley of the Deaf because no noise could enter. The sons and daughters of Callatan soon realized their plan was not working, and one of the daughters disguised herself as Niamh, a friend of Cú Chulainn's, and entered the Valley of the Deaf. There she met Cú Chulainn and told him he was needed in battle, and Cú Chulainn was successfully lured. Cú Chulainn saddled his horse, the Grey of Macha, the king of horses, gathered his weapons, and called his charioteer, Lugh, the king of charioteers, to his side. Completing the trio, Cú Chulainn was the king of warriors, and together they rode out to battle. As he was riding out, he saw an old woman washing clothes in the river. He asked whose gore-stained garments she was washing. She replied that they were Cú Chulainn's, who was going to die today. Cú Chulainn drove on. He came to a group of one-eyed hags on the side of the road, who were roasting a dog on a spit. Cú Chulainn attempted to avoid them because his Gias forbade him from partaking in the dog. But as he passed, they called out to him and offered the dog to him to eat. Now, Cú Chulainn tried to politely refuse, but he was also under another Gias, one that forbade him from refusing hospitality. And it was a stronger Gias than his aversion to eating dog meat. He was compelled to eat the dog meat, and as he ate it, he felt all the strength leave his left arm and leg, and half of him was now no stronger than a normal man. It is thought that these may have been the Morrigan, these hags, returned after her defeat at the hands of Cú Chulainn, taking advantage of this plot to exact her own revenge upon him after he refused her advance years earlier. He continued on and came to encounter the three sons of Caladan. Lugh and Ered were also there with them. It had been prophesied that the first three spears Cú Chulainn cast during this battle would kill 3 kings. One of the sons asked Cú Chulainn for a spear, or he would insult him. So Cú Chulainn gave him one, throwing the spear with such ferocity it went through the man's head. Lugh picked up the spear and threw it back, and it hit Cú Chulainn's trusted charioteer leg, killing the first king. The second son came forward and asked for a spear. Cú Chulainn refused, but then the man threatened to insult Ulster, and with that, Cú Chulainn threw another spear through the second son's head. Ered picked up the spear and threw it back, and it hit the Gáe Bulg, killing the second king, the king of horses. At this, Cú Chulainn was greatly grieved. The third son stepped forward and asked for a spear. Cú Chulainn refused again, but then the man threatened to insult his family, and Cú Chulainn threw a spear through his head. Lugh picked up the spear and threw it straight and true, and it hit Cú Chulainn in the stomach, spilling his intestines and mortally wounding the king of warriors. But Cú Chulainn did not die in that moment, and his ferocity was renowned. Even at this point, his enemies refused to approach him. So Cú Chulainn crawled to a lake where he could get a drink, and not wanting to die lying down, he pulled himself up on a standing stone and lashed himself up using his belt, or some thought his own intestines, to the stone so that he could die standing up, facing his enemies, holding his sword ready. And then the king of warriors died. The men stayed back for 3 days, fearful that Cú Chulainn lived still, until a raven, some think it was the Morrigan herself, perched on his head, indicating he was finally dead. Lugh approached the body and severed his head, and when he tried to get the sword out of Cú Chulainn's hands, it fell and sliced Lugh's hand off. Lugh was slain by a friend of Cú Chulainn's shortly after, but that is another story. And so ends the story of Cú Chulainn, Chulainn's Hound, hero and legend of Ireland, a symbol that echoes throughout millennia, who achieved great fame through his deeds and heroism, although his life was very short. His honor was without bounds, and he was symbolic to his nation's heritage. The light of Ulster left this world in Celtic mythology.